Some connections run deeper than blood, binding us through invisible threads of fate, even when we try to outrun them. For Morgan Reese, a 46-year-old former Marine turned long-haul trucker, the open highway had become both her salvation and her escape from a past she could never fully leave behind. The early autumn rain pelted against the windshield of her Peterbilt, the rhythmic sweep of the wipers marking time as she navigated the twisting mountain roads of western Colorado. Route 50 was treacherous on the best of days, but tonight's unexpected downpour had transformed it into a glistening black ribbon that demanded every ounce of her concentration. Most truckers avoided this stretch after dark, opting for the longer but safer interstate routes. Morgan preferred it this way. Fewer vehicles, fewer distractions, just her and the machine she'd piloted across 48 states over the past 11 years. Morgan adjusted her position in the worn leather seat, wincing slightly as her right shoulder protested the movement. The old injury, a souvenir from her second deployment to Afghanistan, always flared up during weather changes. She'd learned to live with it, just as she'd learned to live with all the other scars, visible and invisible, that her 8 years in the Corps had left her with. "Just 4 more hours to Grand Junction," she muttered to herself, reaching for the thermos of black coffee secured in its holder. Her calloused fingers wrapped around the steel container, drawing comfort from its warmth. The cab of her truck was meticulously organized, a habit ingrained during her military years. Everything had its place. The dog-eared road atlas tucked into the side compartment, the small collection of audiobooks neatly stored in the glove box, the framed photograph of her old platoon secured to the dashboard with Velcro. Morgan's gaze lingered momentarily on the photograph. 9 faces grinning under the Afghan sun, arms slung around each other's shoulders, a moment of camaraderie frozen in time. Only 4 of those Marines had come home. The weight of that knowledge had driven her to the solitude of long-haul trucking, where the constant movement helped quiet the voices of the past. The radio crackled with static as she lost reception. In the mountain pass, Morgan clicked it off, preferring the rumble of the engine and the drumming of rain to the empty airwaves. Her shift had started 14 hours ago in Kansas City, and she was pushing the limits of legal driving time. The shipping company had been pressing drivers harder lately. Faster deliveries, tighter schedules, thinner margins. Morgan didn't complain. She needed the miles, needed the distraction of focused work and exhaustion at day's end. A flash of lightning illuminated the steep slopes rising on either side of the highway, revealing the sheer drop just beyond the guardrail to her right. Morgan tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her face set in concentration. At 46, she had the weathered features of someone who had spent too much time under hard skies. Her dark hair, streaked with premature gray, was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and fine lines fanned out from eyes that had seen too much. The green highway sign appeared in her headlights. Cedar Ridge, 3 miles. Morgan checked her. Fuel gauge, still half a tank, but her bladder had its own agenda after hours of coffee. A quick pit stop wouldn't hurt. The small mountain town wasn't much, just a cluster of buildings serving the ski resorts further up the mountains and the occasional through traffic like herself. The rain began to ease as Morgan downshifted, the familiar vibration of the engine traveling up through the seat as she approached the exit. The truck's headlights cut through the thinning precipitation, illuminating the worn asphalt of the off-ramp. At this hour, just past midnight, she expected The small town to be mostly dark, with perhaps a single gas station still open for overnight travelers. The 24-hour Fill and Go came into view, its fluorescent lights creating a harsh bubble of illumination in the surrounding darkness. Morgan navigated her rig into the oversized parking area reserved for commercial vehicles, noticing she was the only truck driver stopping tonight. Unusual for this time, typically there'd be at least one or two other rigs, their drivers grabbing coffee or catching brief naps before continuing their journeys. As she shut off the engine, Morgan noticed a compact SUV parked at an odd angle near the convenience store entrance. Its driver's side door stood slightly ajar, interior lights still on, casting a weak glow across the empty front seat. Something about the scene triggered her internal alarm system, a sense developed during combat patrols that had saved her life. More than once. "Who leaves their door open in this weather?" she murmured, reaching for her heavy-duty flashlight before climbing down from the cab. The mountain air hit her with a bracing chill as her boots connected with the wet pavement. Morgan stretched her legs and rolled her shoulders, working out the kinks from hours behind the wheel. 11 years of trucking had taught her to listen to her instincts, and right now they were telling her something wasn't right. Instead of heading straight for the convenience store, Morgan walked toward the SUV, moving with the measured caution that had once been as natural to her as breathing. The vehicle was a newer model Honda CR-V, dark blue with Colorado plates. The interior light illuminated a scene of hasty departure. A purse spilled open on the passenger seat, its contents scattered across the console, a smartphone lying screen up on the driver's seat. "Hello? Anyone here?" Morgan called out, her voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet night. No response came, except for the distant drip of rainwater from the gas station's metal awning. Morgan peered inside the vehicle, noting the keys still in the ignition and a child's backpack on. The rear seat, decorated with colorful butterfly patches. A cold weight settled in the pit of her stomach. A mother and child? Where were they? That's when she noticed the scuff marks in the wet gravel, what looked like drag marks leading away from the SUV toward the side of the gas station. Morgan's heart began to pound with a familiar rhythm, the surge of adrenaline taking her back to moments she'd spent years trying to forget. She should just go inside, tell the cashier, mind her own business. That would be the sensible thing to do. But the empty vehicle, the child's backpack, the open door in the rain, all of it screamed of trouble. Morgan had walked away from too many people who needed help in her life. She wouldn't do it again. Pulling the flashlight from her jacket pocket and making sure her pocket knife was accessible, Morgan followed the trail. The marks led her around the side of the building, past the air pump, and toward a small grassy area that bordered the property. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, finally landing on a crumpled form lying motionless in the wet grass. "Damn it," Morgan breathed, rushing forward as her training took over. It was a girl, not a small child as she'd feared from the backpack, but a teenager, maybe 15 or 16, sprawled face down and completely still. She wore jeans and a light jacket, both soaked through from the rain. One sneaker was missing from her foot. Morgan knelt beside her, setting the flashlight on the ground so it illuminated the scene. With practiced movements, she checked for immediate threats before gently rolling the girl onto her back. The teenager's face was pale in the harsh beam, her dark hair matted to her forehead. A nasty contusion marked her left temple, blood diluted by rainwater trickling down her cheek. Morgan pressed 2 fingers to the girl's neck, relieved to find a steady pulse. "Hey, can you hear me?" she asked, lightly patting the girl's cheek. No response came, but her breathing seemed regular. Morgan quickly shrugged off her own jacket and draped it over the girl's torso. The teen's skin felt cold to the touch, too cold. How long had she been out here in the rain? "Hang on, kid. Let's get you someplace warm," Morgan said, already assessing the best way to move her. Before lifting the unconscious teenager, Morgan needed to know if there were any obvious injuries beyond the head wound. A careful examination revealed no visible broken bones or other trauma, though the head injury itself was concerning enough. As Morgan prepared to lift the girl, her hand brushed against something hard in the pocket of the teen's jacket. Hesitating, only a moment, she needed to identify this girl, find out who to contact. Morgan carefully reached into the pocket and withdrew a worn leather wallet. Inside, she found a high school ID card, a library card, and a crumpled $10 bill. Morgan angled her flashlight to read the school ID. Lily Harrington, Westridge High School, Cedar Ridge, CO. The photograph showed a smiling version of the unconscious girl, dark hair pulled back, bright eyes full of life, but it was what she found in the inner pocket of the wallet that made Morgan's blood run cold. Behind the school ID was a military identification card. The photo showed a woman in marine dress blues, her features so similar to the teenagers that they could only be mother and daughter. The name printed on the card, Staff Sergeant Victoria, Harrington, United States Marine Corps. Morgan's hands trembled as she stared at the ID. It couldn't be. She knew that face, knew that name. Memories she had spent years burying surged back with overwhelming force. Staff Sergeant Victoria Harrington had been her closest friend during her third deployment. They had served in the same unit, shared the same quarters, watched each other's backs through the worst firefights. Victoria had been the one who saved Morgan's life during the ambush outside Kabul, dragging her to safety after the IED blast that killed 3 of their team and left Morgan with the shoulder injury that still plagued her. Victoria Harrington, the Marine who had made Morgan promise to live well enough for both of them if anything happened. The friend who hadn't made it home from that same deployment, killed 2 weeks before they were due to rotate out. And now, by some cosmic coincidence that felt too deliberate to be chance, Morgan found herself kneeling beside Victoria's daughter on a rainy night in a forgotten corner of Colorado. The universe, it seemed, had a cruel sense of irony, or perhaps an unexpected sense of purpose. "Lily," Morgan whispered, looking down at the unconscious teenager with new understanding. "I knew your mother, and I owe her everything." The sound of tires on wet gravel snapped Morgan back to the present. Headlights swept across the parking lot as a pickup truck pulled in, its engine growling in the quiet night. Something about the deliberate way it moved, slowly circling the SUV, raised Morgan's combat instincts to full alert. Without fully understanding why, Morgan gathered Lily into her arms. The girl was lighter than she expected, or perhaps it was the surge of protective adrenaline that made the weight seem insignificant. Morgan retreated further into the shadows beside the gas station, cradling Victoria's daughter against her chest. From this position, she watched as a man climbed out of the pickup, tall and heavy-set with a shaved head. Even from a distance, she could see he moved with purpose, checking the abandoned SUV before looking around the parking lot. When his gaze traveled toward the back of the gas station, Morgan pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath. She didn't know what was happening, but every instinct honed through combat and survival screamed at her to protect this girl, her fallen friend's daughter. 11 years of trucking had taught her many things, but it was her Marine training that had prepared her for moments like this. Moments when instinct and split-second decisions could mean life or death. "I've got you. Lily," she whispered to the unconscious teenager. "Your mom had my back once. Now I've got yours." Morgan held her breath as the man prowled around the SUV, his movements methodical and controlled. Military or law enforcement, she guessed, recognizing the practiced efficiency in his search pattern. The rain had picked up again, droplets glistening in the harsh fluorescent lights as he circled the vehicle, peering inside before scanning the parking lot. With Lily cradled against her chest, Morgan calculated her options. The distance to her truck seemed impossibly vast. 50 yards of open, illuminated parking lot with nowhere to hide. But staying put with an injured, unconscious teenager wasn't viable either. The girl needed medical attention, and soon. The man pulled something from his pocket. A phone, Morgan realized with a surge of relief, not a weapon. He punched in numbers, held it to his ear, his posture tense as he waited for a connection. Though she couldn't hear his words, the sharp, urgent gestures told their own story. Whoever he was looking for, he was worried. A new thought struck Morgan with uncomfortable force. What if this man wasn't a threat, but someone searching for Lily? A father, uncle, family friend? She had acted on instinct, assuming danger, but perhaps she was misreading the situation entirely. Before she could reconsider her next move, the convenience store door swung open. The cashier, a young man barely out of his teens, stepped outside, cigarette in hand, lighter poised. The man from the pickup immediately approached him, showing something Morgan couldn't see. The cashier nodded, pointing toward the side of the building, directly at where Morgan and Lily were sheltered in the shadows. "Damn it," Morgan muttered. Time had run out for careful planning. With decision made, Morgan adjusted her grip on Lily and moved rapidly along the wall toward the back of the building, staying in the shadows. Years of combat training kicked in. Move quietly, use cover, create distance. The back of the gas station opened onto a small service area, beyond which lay a steep, wooded embankment leading down to a creek bed. Not ideal terrain for carrying an injured person, but right now, concealment mattered more than comfort. Morgan could hear footsteps approaching, the beam of a flashlight sweeping the ground where Lily had been lying moments before. "Someone's been here," a gruff voice called out. "Fresh blood on the grass." Adjusting Lily's weight against her chest, Morgan slipped behind a dumpster just as the man rounded the corner, his flashlight scanning the service area. The rain worked in her favor, muffling sounds and obscuring visibility, but it wouldn't hide them for long. "Lily," the man shouted, voice echoing against the metal dumpsters. "Lily Harrington." The fact that he knew the girl's name gave Morgan pause. Was she making a terrible mistake? But something kept her from calling out, from revealing their position. The same instinct that had kept her alive in hostile territory. As the flashlight beam swept past their hiding spot, Morgan glimpsed the distinctive shield-shaped badge clipped to the man's belt. Some kind of law enforcement then. But that didn't necessarily mean safety. Morgan had learned through hard experience that authority and protection weren't always synonymous. The girl in her arms stirred slightly, a soft groan escaping her lips. Morgan pressed a gentle hand over her mouth, silently willing her to remain quiet. Lily's eyelids fluttered but didn't open, her body shivering despite the jacket wrapped around her. The man moved closer, his boots scraping against the gravel as he methodically searched the area. Morgan knew they couldn't stay hidden for long. She needed to move, and fast. Timing her movement with the renewed downpour, Morgan darted from behind the dumpster toward the wooded embankment. Lily's limp form clutched against her chest. The descent was treacherous, her boots sliding on wet leaves and loose soil. But years of physical conditioning allowed her to maintain balance even with the added weight of the teenager in her arms. Behind them, the flashlight beam swept over, the spot they'd vacated seconds earlier. Morgan heard a curse, followed by the sound of the man speaking urgently into his radio or phone. At the bottom of the embankment, she paused in the shelter of a large pine, trying to get her bearings. The creek below was swollen with rainwater, rushing past with enough force to be dangerous. To her left, the terrain flattened out toward what appeared to be a maintenance road or trail running parallel to the creek. Right led back toward the highway, but also toward the man pursuing them. Morgan chose left, moving at a steady jog, grateful for the tree cover that shielded them from both rain and searching eyes. Each step jarred her old shoulder injury, sending spikes of pain through her upper body. But she pushed the discomfort aside with practiced discipline. After 5 minutes of careful progress, Morgan spotted what she'd been hoping for. An old maintenance shed, likely used by the highway department for storing equipment. Its weathered wooden walls offered the first real shelter they'd encountered. The padlock on the door was rusted, but still functional. Morgan gently set Lily down against the wall, sheltered by the shed's small overhang, then retrieved her pocket knife. Years of driving across every kind of terrain had taught her more than just navigation. Picking simple locks was a skill she'd acquired out of necessity when keys got lost or doors jammed. 30 seconds of careful manipulation, and the lock gave way with a satisfying click. Morgan pushed the door open, wincing at the protesting creak of hinges. The interior was musty but dry, filled with the expected assortment of road maintenance. Equipment, shovels, salt bags, traffic cones, and a small workbench. Home sweet home, at least for the moment, Morgan muttered, gathering Lily into her arms once more and carrying her inside. She closed the door behind them, then set the girl down on a tarp she pulled from a shelf, creating a makeshift bed away from the cold concrete floor. With shelter secured, Morgan could finally properly assess Lily's condition. She pulled a small emergency kit from her cargo pants pocket, another habit from her military days, and used the small LED light to examine the girl's head wound. The contusion looked worse than it actually was, the bleeding already stopped. A concussion seemed likely, but without more serious symptoms manifesting. Morgan guessed it wasn't severe. More concerning was Lily's temperature. Her skin felt cool and clammy, her breathing shallow. Hypothermia setting in, Morgan diagnosed grimly. Need to get you warm, kid. Working methodically, Morgan located a stack of emergency blankets on a shelf, the reflective kind used by road crews in winter emergencies. She wrapped 2 around Lily's body, then added her own jacket again as an outer layer. As she worked, Morgan's mind cycled through the impossible coincidence that had brought her here. Victoria Harrington's daughter. Of all the roads in America, all the small towns and gas stations where their paths might have crossed, how was this possible? Morgan had met Victoria during her 3rd deployment, when they were both assigned to a female engagement team in Helmand Province. Their friendship had been immediate and deep, the kind of bond forged in shared danger and mutual respect. Victoria had been dedicated, professional, but with a streak of irreverent humor that made even the darkest days bearable. And now here was her daughter, unconscious and vulnerable, with Morgan as her unlikely guardian. Victoria would have been, what, 42 now? Morgan tried to calculate how old Lily must have been when her mother died. 7, 8? Young enough that memories would be fragmentary, impressions rather than complete pictures. The soft groan from the makeshift bed pulled Morgan from her thoughts. Lily's eyelids fluttered again, this time opening fully, revealing disoriented brown, eyes so similar to Victoria's that Morgan felt her chest tighten. "Mom," Lily mumbled, voice barely audible. Morgan moved quickly to her side, keeping her voice gentle. "Hey there, my name's Morgan. You've had a bit of an accident." Confusion clouded the girl's features as she struggled to focus. Where am I? Safe for the moment. You're in a maintenance shed near the gas station where I found you. Do you remember what happened? How you got hurt? Lily's hand moved shakily to her temple, fingers brushing the matted hair near her wound. Pain flashed across her face, followed by a wave of fear. "He found me," she whispered. "I tried to run, but he caught up." "Who found you, Lily?" Morgan asked, careful to keep her tone calm despite the alarm bells ringing in her head. Lily's eyes widened. "How do you know my name?" "I found your school ID," Morgan explained, deliberately omitting mention of the military ID for now. "Can you tell me who you were running from?" Tears welled in Lily's eyes. "My stepdad, Ray, he..." A violent shiver interrupted her words, her teeth chattering audibly. "It's okay. You're safe now," Morgan assured her, adjusting the emergency. "Blankets. We need to get your temperature up first, then we can talk about Ray." Outside, distant shouts carried through the rain, the search expanding. "They wouldn't be safe here for long. Listen to me, Lily. That man at the gas station, was that Ray?" Lily nodded, fear evident in her expression. "He's a deputy sheriff. Nobody believes me when I tell them. They think I'm making it up." The pieces clicked into place for Morgan, the badge she'd glimpsed, the confident way the man had moved, the immediate response from the cashier. Not just any threat, but one with authority, resources, and a presumption of credibility. "What about your..." "Dad, is there someone else we can call?" Morgan asked, already suspecting the answer. "Don't have one," Lily mumbled. "Just Ray, since Mom died. Grandma's in Phoenix, but Ray won't let me see her." Morgan's jaw tightened. The situation was deteriorating from concerning to genuinely dangerous. They were hiding from a law enforcement officer who could easily report Lily missing and Morgan as her abductor. Every minute increased the risk. "Lily, this is important. I need you to trust me. I'm going to get you somewhere safe, but first, can you walk? We need to move before they find us here." The girl struggled to sit up, determination flashing through the pain and confusion in her eyes. "I think so, just dizzy. Take it slow, I'll help you." Morgan supported Lily as she got to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. "One more thing. The military ID in your wallet. That was your mom's." Surprise registered on Lily's face. "You found that too? I always carry it. It's all I have left of her." Morgan nodded, making a quick decision. "Your mom was Victoria Harrington, Marine Corps, right? How did you..." "We served together, Lily. Your mom and I were in the same unit in Afghanistan. She was my friend." The words felt insufficient to describe what Victoria had been. Comrade, confidant, savior. Lily froze, staring at Morgan with newfound intensity, searching her face for confirmation or deception. "You knew my mom?" I did, and she saved my life once. Morgan gently squeezed the girl's shoulder. Now I'm going to help save yours, but we have to move now. The sound of vehicles approaching on the maintenance road galvanized them into action. Morgan peered through a grimy window, spotting headlights cutting through the rain about a quarter-mile away. Back door, she decided, guiding Lily toward a rear exit she'd identified during her initial assessment of the shed. We'll follow the creek. The water will hide our tracks. As they slipped out into the rainy darkness, Morgan's mind raced with possible next steps. Her truck was back at the gas station, inaccessible for now. They needed transportation, communication, and a safer place to regroup. Most of all, they needed to get beyond Ray's jurisdiction before he could organize a more comprehensive search. If Lily's account was accurate, the man had built a life on control and deception. Men like that didn't give up easily when their authority was challenged. "Morgan?" Lily asked, her voice small against the sound of rainfall and rushing water as they picked their way along the creek bank. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Morgan glanced down at the teenager, seeing echoes of Victoria in her determined stance, despite her obvious pain and fear. "I know enough," she answered simply. "Sometimes the debts we owe the dead are paid to the living." With the distant headlights growing brighter behind them, Morgan led Victoria's daughter deeper into the Colorado night. Away from one danger and into an uncertain future bound by a promise made years ago in a desert halfway around the world. The creek led them deeper into the wooded area behind the gas station, the terrain growing more challenging with each step. Lily stumbled several times, her coordination still affected by the head injury, but she pushed forward with grim determination that reminded Morgan painfully of Victoria. "Not much farther," Morgan encouraged, though it was a hollow promise. In truth, she had no concrete destination in mind, only the immediate goal of putting distance between them and Ray. They followed the waterway for nearly half a mile, the sound of vehicles and voices gradually fading behind them. When they reached a clearing where the creek widened into a small pond, Morgan called a brief halt. Lily was shivering violently now, her lips taking on a bluish tinge despite the emergency blankets. "We need to find real shelter and get you properly warm," Morgan said, scanning their surroundings. The maintenance road they'd avoided earlier curved around the far side of the pond, eventually connecting to what looked like a wider gravel road. Lily leaned against a tree, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "There's a ranger station," she managed through chattering teeth, "about 2 miles east of town. My class went there on a field trip last year." Morgan nodded, recalibrating their route mentally. "Good thinking. Might have a radio, medical supplies. You think you can make it 2 more miles?" The teenager straightened, a flash of her mother's stubborn courage visible beneath the pain and fatigue. "Do I have a choice?" "There's always a choice," Morgan replied, surprised by the softness in her own voice. "But sometimes none of the options are great." They set off again, this time following the gravel road at a careful distance, using a tree line for cover. The rain had tapered to a drizzle, but the night air remained cold, especially at this elevation. Morgan kept a supportive arm around Lily, monitoring her condition with growing concern. The head injury itself wasn't life-threatening, but combined with exposure and exhaustion, it posed serious risks. "Tell me about my mom," Lily said suddenly, her voice barely audible above their footsteps on the wet ground. "Everyone always says she was a hero, but nobody tells me who she actually was." Morgan glanced down at the girl, weighing her response carefully. "She was the real deal," she said finally, Smart, tough, never backed down from a fight. But she wasn't just hard edges. She had this way of making people feel seen, really seen, even in the middle of all that chaos. Was she funny? I remember her laughing a lot. The funniest, Morgan confirmed, a smile tugging at her lips despite their circumstances. She had this completely inappropriate joke for every situation. Made the officers crazy, but the rest of us needed it. Kept us human when everything around us was not. Lily seemed to gather strength from these small details, her pace steadying as they continued through the forest. How did she save your life? The question Morgan had been dreading. She considered deflecting but decided against it. Victoria's daughter deserved the truth, or at least as much of it as Morgan could bear to share. We were on patrol near Kabul, she began, the memories sharper than she'd expected after all these years. Our convoy hit an IED, that's an improvised explosive device. The Humvee I was in flipped, caught fire. I was pinned, couldn't get out. Your mom was in the vehicle ahead. Protocol said secure the perimeter, call for backup, wait, but Victoria, Morgan's voice caught. She ran back through hostile fire, pulled me out just before the fuel tank went, then went back for the others. Lily was silent for several moments, absorbing this. And that's when she died? Morgan shook her head. No, that was 3 weeks. Earlier, the day she died was a routine escort mission. Nothing special, just bad luck and worse timing. The half-truth came easily. Victoria's final mission had been classified, the details shared only on a need-to-know basis. What mattered was that she died as she'd lived, protecting others. Ray said it was a waste, Lily said quietly, bitterness edging her words. Said. She died for nothing in a country that didn't want us there. Morgan's jaw tightened. Your mother never wasted a single day of her life, and she believed in what she was doing, protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. She paused, then added more gently, that's what you're doing now, Lily. Protecting yourself when no one else would. The teenager fell silent again, but her steps seemed more purposeful, her shoulders slightly straighter. After another 20 minutes of careful progress, they spotted the ranger station through the trees, a small cabin-like structure with a metal roof and a radio antenna. No vehicles were parked outside, and no lights showed through the windows. Looks empty, Morgan observed, scanning the area, for any signs of their pursuers before guiding Lily toward the building. Let's hope it's not locked up tight. The front door proved to be secured with a padlock similar to the one she'd picked at the maintenance shed. Morgan made quick work of it, less concerned now about leaving evidence of their entry. By morning, they needed to be far from here anyway. Inside, the ranger station was basic but well-maintained. A small office area with a desk and radio equipment, a kitchenette with a propane stove, and a back room with a cot for overnight shifts. Morgan immediately steered Lily toward the cot. First priority is warming you up, she said, stripping the sodden emergency blankets from the girl's shoulders and replacing them with dry wool blankets she found in a storage cabinet. I'm going to check out that radio, see if there's any way to get help without alerting your stepfather. Lily grabbed her wrist, panic flashing in her eyes. You can't call the police. Ray is the police. Not all of them, Morgan countered gently. But I understand your concern. I'm just going to listen for now, get a sense of what we're dealing with. The radio was an older model, but functional. Morgan tuned it to the emergency frequency, keeping the volume low as she listened to the chatter. What she heard confirmed. Her fears, An all-points bulletin had been issued for a missing teenager, possibly abducted by an unidentified woman. The description of Morgan was vague, but would be enough for any law enforcement who encountered them. "They're looking for us," she told Lily, who had managed to stop shivering as the blankets did their work. "Your stepfathers reported you missing, and me as your kidnapper." Fear crept back into Lily's expression. "They'll believe him. They always do." "Why is that, Lily? What's his hold over you?" The teenager pulled the blankets tighter around herself, as if seeking protection from more than just the cold. "After Mom died, I was just a kid. He seemed nice at first. Mom's friend from high school who'd always had a thing for her. When they got married, I was happy. Thought we'd be a family." Morgan nodded encouragingly, moving to the kitchenette to heat water for tea or instant coffee, whatever she could find in the supplies. "But then he changed," Lily continued, her voice dropping. "Started with small things, checking my phone, not letting me see friends. Then the punishments got worse. If I did anything he didn't like, he'd lock me in my room, sometimes for days. No one at school noticed. He's good at making sure the bruises don't show." The matter-of-fact way she described the abuse made Morgan's chest ache. Children adapted. To survive, she knew. They normalized what they shouldn't have to endure. "The worst part is the way he talks about Mom," Lily added, unexpected anger flaring in her voice. Like she was stupid for serving, like her sacrifice meant nothing. He hated that I kept her things, especially her military ID. Said I needed to move on. "But you didn't," Morgan observed, finding a canister of instant cocoa and measuring it into 2 mugs. "I couldn't. It felt like forgetting her would be letting her die all over again." Lily accepted the mug Morgan offered, wrapping her hands around it for warmth. "Last week, I found out he's been stealing money from my college fund, the military. Benefits that were supposed to be for me. When I confronted him, he lost it. That's when I knew I had to run." The parallel to the financial abuse Morgan had witnessed among military widows was striking, but not surprising. It was a familiar pattern. Isolate, control, exploit. The fact that Ray had a badge only made him more dangerous. "We need to document this," Morgan said, mind already racing through options. "The financial theft especially. That leaves a paper trail. And your injuries now?" Lily shook her head. "You don't understand. He's got friends in the county prosecutor's office, connections everywhere. Nobody will take my word over his." "Then we'll find someone outside his sphere of influence," Morgan countered, determination hardening her resolve. "Your grandmother in Phoenix. Could she help?" "Maybe, but Ray cut me off from calling her years ago. I don't even have her number memorized anymore." Morgan paced the small cabin, considering their options. Her truck was still at the gas station, containing her phone, wallet, and identification. By now, Ray would have run her plates, identified her, perhaps even searched the vehicle. She was officially implicated, her normal life suspended until this situation resolved. The realization brought a strange clarity. There was no going back, no pretending this hadn't happened. Morgan had crossed her personal Rubicon the moment she'd recognized Victoria's daughter and made the choice to protect her. "Here's what we're going to do," she said. Decision made. "We'll rest here until first light. The ranger who runs this station will show up for the morning shift. We'll be gone before then. We need transportation, so we'll borrow one of the ATVs I saw in the shed out back." "And go where?" Lily asked, the practical question of a child who had learned not to expect easy solutions. "West, into Grand Junction. It's a bigger jurisdiction, outside your stepfather's direct influence. I have a contact there, former Marine who runs a veterans support center. He'll help us connect with people who can protect you properly. You really think anyone will believe me over Ray? Morgan met the teenager's skeptical gaze with unwavering confidence. I believe you. And once we get you somewhere safe, we'll find others who will too. The financial records will back up your story. The military takes a dim view of people who steal benefits meant for dependents. For the first time since regaining consciousness, Lily's expression held a fragile hope. You do all that for me, risk everything? You barely know me. Morgan considered her response carefully. The easy answer would be to invoke her debt to Victoria, the life saved for a life now protected. But looking at this brave, wounded girl fighting against isolation and abuse, Morgan recognized a deeper truth. I know what it's like to have the system fail you, she said finally, to have people look away because the truth is inconvenient. After I left the Marines, I had some rough years, PTSD, drinking, the whole cliché. The people who should have helped didn't want to see the problem. I learned that sometimes the only person you can count on is the one willing to stand between you and the world when everyone else steps aside. She paused, meeting Lily's gaze directly. Your mother did that for me once. Now it's my turn to do it for someone else. The fact that it's her daughter, well, maybe the universe isn't as random as we like to think. Lily blinked rapidly, fighting tears. Mom would have liked that you found me. She would have kicked my ass if I'd done anything else, Morgan replied, with a small smile. The radio crackled suddenly, a dispatcher's voice cutting through the quiet cabin. All units be advised. APB update on the Harrington abduction. Suspect vehicle identified as a blue Peterbilt semi. Colorado commercial plate 729XRN. Registered to Morgan Reese, white female 46, former military. Consider armed and dangerous. Morgan's smile faded. Armed and dangerous. Ray was escalating, ensuring that any law enforcement who encountered them would approach with weapons drawn, questions asked later, if at all. That's not good, Lily whispered. No, Morgan agreed, mentally revising their options. Changes things. They'll have roadblocks on the main routes by now. The radio continued, confirming her assessment as the dispatcher directed units to establish checkpoints on all major roads leading out of Cedar Ridge. So we're trapped? Fear crept back into Lily's voice. Morgan shook her head. Not trapped, just need a different approach. She moved to the window, studying the gradually lightening sky. Dawn was still an hour away, but the faintest gray was beginning to dilute the absolute darkness. I've spent 11 years finding ways across this country that don't show up on maps. Trust me, there's always another route. She returned to the table, spreading out a topographical map of the area she'd found in the desk drawer. See this? She traced a line with her finger. Old logging roads. They connect to Forest Service routes that eventually lead to I-70. But through the backcountry, where they won't be watching. Can an ATV make it that far? Far enough to get us to a small town where we can find alternative transportation. From there, we can contact my friend in Grand Junction without going through official channels. Lily studied the map, clearly trying to match Morgan's confidence, but betrayed by the slight tremor in her hands. She was exhausted, injured and scared, running on fumes and determination. Get some rest, Morgan told her gently. I'll keep watch and wake you when it's time to move. You're going to need your strength. As Lily reluctantly lay back on the cot, Morgan returned to the window, scanning the forest beyond for any sign of approaching searchers. The radio continued to crackle with updates, each one confirming that their window of opportunity was narrowing. The coming dawn would either be their salvation or their undoing. One thing was certain. Morgan had crossed a line from which there was no return. She had made herself an outlaw in the eyes of local authorities, risking her livelihood, her freedom, even her life for the daughter of a woman 8 years dead. And yet watching Lily finally surrender to exhaustion, her face in sleep revealing the child she still was beneath the forced maturity, Morgan felt no regret. Some promises transcended time, space, and even death itself. Some debts could only be paid forward. Outside, the eastern sky continued its slow transformation from black to gray, heralding a day that would determine both their fates. Morgan settled into the chair by the window, her back to the wall, her eyes on the forest, prepared to defend Victoria's daughter with every resource and skill at her disposal. The point of no return wasn't just behind them. It was the only place Morgan had ever truly belonged. The forest awakened with the first threads of dawn, birds calling, small creatures rustling in the underbrush, the rhythmic drip of rainwater from leaf to leaf. Morgan remained motionless at the window, her vigilance undiminished despite the hours spent watching. 11 years of long-haul driving had conditioned her body to function on minimal sleep, a skill now serving a purpose she'd never anticipated. Lily slept fitfully on the cot, occasional murmurs and restless movements suggesting her dreams were far from peaceful. The head injury concerned Morgan, but the girl's coherent speech and steady pupils before falling asleep had somewhat allayed fears of serious trauma. The radio had fallen silent in the pre-dawn hours, the cessation of updates more worrying than the constant chatter. It suggested the search had either been suspended until daylight or had moved to encrypted channels, neither scenario working in their favor. A flash of movement near the tree line caught Morgan's attention. She froze, eyes narrowing as she tracked the source. A deer emerged from the shadows, cautiously approaching the small clearing before the ranger station. Morgan exhaled slowly, tension easing from her shoulders, but the momentary alarm served as a reminder. They couldn't linger here much longer. She crossed to the cot, gently shaking Lily awake. "Time to move," she said softly, as the girl's eyes fluttered open, momentary confusion giving way to stark remembrance. "Have they found us?" Lily asked, immediately alert with the practiced wariness of someone accustomed to threat. "Not yet, but we shouldn't push our luck. How's your head?" Lily gingerly touched the bruised area, wincing slightly. "Better, I think. Still hurts, but not spinning anymore." Morgan nodded, helping the teenager to her feet. "Good. We need to move. Quickly. That means no dizzy spells or fainting. Tell me immediately if you start feeling worse." While Lily used the station's small bathroom, Morgan gathered supplies, a first aid kit, 2 bottles of water, energy bars from a desk drawer, a flashlight. She found a ranger's jacket hanging by the door, several sizes too large for Lily, but dry and warm. Not ideal, but better than nothing. "Put this on," she instructed, handing the jacket to Lily as she emerged, "and eat this while we walk." She passed over an energy bar, tucking a second into her pocket. "Might taste like cardboard, but your body needs the calories." They slipped out the back door into the gray morning light. The ATV shed stood about 30 yards away, partially concealed by a stand of pines. Morgan led the way, moving in a low crouch, scanning continuously for any sign of movement beyond the natural stirrings of the forest. The shed's padlock yielded to her practiced touch. Inside, two all-terrain vehicles waited, keys conveniently hanging on hooks labeled with identification numbers. Morgan selected the one that appeared better maintained, checking fuel levels and controls with practiced efficiency. "Ever ridden one of these?" she asked, wheeling the vehicle out of the shed. Lily shook her head. "Ray wouldn't let me. Said they were too dangerous." Something dark flickered across Morgan's face. Well, he got that much right, at least. "They can be tricky if you don't know what you're doing. You'll ride behind me, arms around my waist. Lean when I lean, stay centered. Got it?" Lily nodded, her expression resolute despite the lingering shadows of fear in her eyes. Morgan started. The engine, wincing at the noise that seemed thunderous in the quiet forest. No way to avoid it. They needed the speed and maneuverability the ATV offered. "Let's go," she said, helping Lily onto the seat behind her before gunning the engine and heading for the logging trail she'd identified on the map. The route was challenging, even for someone with Morgan's experience. Recent rains had transformed sections of the old logging road into muddy troughs, requiring careful navigation to avoid bogging down. Fallen branches and washouts added additional obstacles, forcing them to reduce speed far below what Morgan would have preferred. Behind her, Lily maintained a white-knuckled grip around Morgan's waist, her body tense but cooperative, moving with the ATV's motion as instructed. The girl's resilience continued to impress Morgan. Many adults would have crumbled under the combined stress of injury, exposure, and pursuit. After 20 minutes of careful progress, they reached a ridge that offered a view back towards Cedar Ridge. Morgan cut the engine, allowing them a moment to assess their situation while conserving fuel. "Look," Lily whispered, pointing toward the town below. Emergency lights flashed along the main road, at least 3 police cruisers and what appeared to be a county sheriff's SUV. Even from this distance, the coordinated movement of the vehicles suggested a methodical search pattern expanding outward from the gas station where their journey had begun. "They're taking this seriously," Morgan observed grimly. "Your stepfather's pulled in some favors." "He's friends with the sheriff," Lily confirmed. "Goes hunting with him every season." Morgan studied the search pattern, calculating distances and timing. "They haven't found the ranger station yet, or there'd be more activity in that direction. We've got maybe an hour before they expand the search this far up." She restarted the ATV, continuing along the ridge before turning onto a barely visible trail that descended through a stand of aspens. The path grew increasingly challenging, forcing Morgan to reduce their speed to a crawl in certain sections. The morning air carried a bite that hinted at the coming winter, especially as they climbed to higher elevations. Lily shivered against Morgan's back despite the ranger jacket, her resilience gradually being worn down by cold, fear, and the relentless jostling of the ATV over rough terrain. After another 45 minutes of difficult travel, they reached a junction where the logging trail intersected with a more established Forest Service road. Morgan paused, consulting her mental map. Left would eventually lead back toward populated areas and potential roadblocks. Right would take them deeper into the national forest, ultimately connecting with fire access routes that could lead them toward Grand Junction through the backcountry. She chose right, increasing their speed on the improved surface. As they rounded a bend, Morgan spotted something that made her heart sink. Fresh tire tracks in the mud, too recent to have been made before last night's rain. "Someone's been here," she said, slowing the ATV to examine the tracks more carefully. Recent, heavy vehicle, probably a truck or SUV. Fear tightened Lily's grip around Morgan's waist. Ray? Maybe. Or Forest Service. Either way, we need to be careful. Morgan continued forward at a reduced speed, senses heightened, scanning the road ahead for any sign of the vehicle that had left the tracks. They had traveled another mile when Morgan spotted a turnout ahead, a small clearing beside the road, where a green Forest Service truck was parked. A uniformed ranger stood beside it, checking something on a clipboard. There was no way around. The dense forest on either side of the road made off-road travel impossible in this section. "Hold on," Morgan muttered to Lily. "Let me handle this." She slowed the ATV, approaching at a casual pace that suggested nothing. More unusual than early morning recreation, the ranger looked up at their approach, surprise evident on his weathered face. He was older, maybe late 50s, with the relaxed confidence of someone who'd spent a lifetime in these woods. "Morning!" he called, as Morgan stopped the ATV a respectful distance away. "You folks are out early." Morgan manufactured a rueful smile. "Thought we'd catch the sunrise from Eagle Point. My niece here's visiting from California, never seen proper mountains before." The ranger's gaze moved to Lily, lingering briefly on the visible bruise at her temple. "That's quite a bump you've, got there, miss." Before Lily could respond, Morgan jumped in. "Had a spill yesterday on the trail back to Pine Lake. These eastern kids, no trail sense. Am I right? Told her to watch for loose rocks, but..." She shrugged with the universal gesture of adult exasperation with teenage carelessness. The ranger nodded, but something in his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "You know, there's been some trouble in the area. Sheriff's Department has alerts out." Morgan kept her expression neutral, though her pulse quickened. "What kind of trouble? Bear activity? We saw some scat on the trail yesterday." "Nothing like that. Missing person case. Young girl about your niece's age." He studied Lily more intently now. "Where'd you say you folks were staying?" "Didn't say," Morgan replied, maintaining her casual tone through force of will. "Cabin rental. West side of Elk Creek. Anniversary present to myself. 20 years since I moved to Colorado." The ranger nodded slowly, his hand drifting to rest near the radio clipped to his belt. "Mind if I see some ID? Just routine? What with the alerts and all?" Morgan's mind raced. This moment could end in several ways, none of them good if the ranger decided to check their identities. She could see the calculation in his eyes. An injured teenage girl, an adult with no verifiable connection to her in a remote area during an active missing persons alert. "Left my wallet back at the cabin," Morgan said, projecting sheepish carelessness. "Wasn't planning on hitting any stores today, but I can give you the rental info if you want to check it out." The ranger's expression hardened slightly. His hand moved from the radio to the utility belt, where Morgan knew a sidearm would be secured. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you both to step off the vehicle for a moment." Lily's grip tightened around Morgan's waist, her fear palpable. Morgan maintained eye contact with the ranger, weighing options that grew more limited by the second. Violence wasn't an option, not against a law enforcement officer doing his job, and certainly not with Lily watching. "Look," Morgan said, dropping the pretense, her voice taking on the direct tone she'd used during her Marine days. "This isn't what it seems. The girl is in danger, but not from me." The ranger's hand settled on his holster flap, not drawing but ready. "Ma'am, I need you to shut off that engine and step away from the vehicle now." Morgan complied, shutting down the ATV but remaining seated. Before you radio this in, you need to know something. The alert you heard, it was called in by Deputy Ray Harrington, right? Cedar Ridge Sheriff's Department? The ranger didn't confirm or deny, but his slight reaction told Morgan she'd guessed correctly. Ray is this girl's stepfather. He's been abusing her for years. I found her unconscious behind a gas station last night after he'd beaten her. Morgan spoke rapidly, knowing she had seconds before the ranger's training overrode any sympathy he might feel. Check the APB details. I'm Morgan Reeves, former Marine. The girl is Lily Harrington. Her mother was Victoria Harrington, also Marines, killed in Afghanistan 8 years ago. The ranger's expression shifted subtly at the mention of military service, but his hand remained near his weapon. That's quite a story, ma'am. It's not a story. Lily spoke up suddenly, her voice stronger than Morgan expected. He's been stealing my military benefits. When I confronted him, he did this. She gestured to the bruise on her temple. He's a deputy. Nobody believes me because he's got a badge, and I'm just a kid. Something flickered in the ranger's eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or recognition of a truth that resonated beyond the immediate situation. Morgan pressed the advantage. You can. Radio this in, and Ray Harrington will show up with his department buddies. They'll take Lily back, file this away, and nothing changes. Or you can give us 30 minutes before you report this encounter. That's all I'm asking. 30 minutes to get her somewhere safe where people outside his jurisdiction can investigate. Properly. The ranger studied them both, conflict evident in his expression. Military benefits, you said? Your mother was killed in action? He asked Lily directly. She nodded. Staff Sergeant Victoria Harrington, 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines. The ranger was silent for a long moment. Then, with deliberate slowness, he removed his hand from his belt. My son did 3 tours with the 4th Marines. Came home, thank God, but not the same. He paused, seeming to reach a decision. I haven't seen anyone on this road today. Won't for another 30 minutes at least. That's my patrol schedule. Relief flooded through Morgan, though she kept her expression controlled. Thank you. The ranger moved to his truck, returning with a folded map. Take this. Stay on the service roads I've marked. They'll lead you to Miller's Crossing, small town, but outside Cedar Ridge jurisdiction. Sheriff there is Sandra Oakes. She's straight as they come, won't be influenced by small-town politics. Morgan accepted the map, recognition of the risk. This man was taking on their behalf, evident in her nod of thanks. One more thing, the ranger added. That ATV has a tracker, standard Forest Service equipment. Once I report it missing, they'll be able to follow it. Understood, Morgan replied. The 30-minute head start would have to be enough. As they prepared to depart, the ranger approached Lily. Your mom was a Marine? Yes, sir. He nodded solemnly. Then she raised you to be tough. Keep being tough, just a little longer. Lily straightened on the ATV seat, a flicker of her mother's pride visible beneath the fear and exhaustion. I will. As they pulled away, continuing down the forest road, Morgan glanced back to see the ranger watching them, hand raised in a gesture that might have been farewell or might have been salute. He helped us, Lily said, surprise evident in her voice. Why would he do that? Military connection, Morgan replied, accelerating now that they had a clearer route. Runs deep, especially for those with family who served, and decent people. Recognize abuse when they see it, badge or no badge. They traveled in silence for several minutes, the forest road winding through increasingly rugged terrain. Morgan's mind raced ahead, plotting their course according to the ranger's map. Miller's Crossing was still a good 30 miles away, too far for the ATV to take them before the tracker would lead pursuers directly to them. "We need to ditch the ATV," she told Lily, as they descended through a steep section of switchbacks. "Once our 30 minutes is up, this thing becomes a liability. Then what?" Practical again, Lily's focus on immediate survival overriding the fear that might otherwise have overwhelmed her. According to this map, there's a maintenance shed near the reservoir about 5 miles ahead. Might find something useful there. If not, we hike out to where these service roads connect with county maintenance routes, increases our chances of finding alternative transportation. The plan was tenuous at best, relying on too many variables beyond their control, but it was all they had. Morgan pushed the ATV harder, knowing that each minute of their head start was precious. The maintenance shed appeared exactly where the map indicated, a weathered metal structure nestled against a rocky outcropping overlooking the reservoir. Morgan approached cautiously, cutting the ATV's engine 100 yards out and coasting the final distance to minimize noise. The morning had fully arrived now. Sun breaking through scattered clouds, illuminating the landscape with deceptive serenity. "Wait here," she instructed Lily, helping the girl dismount. "Stay low and keep watch. Signal if you see anyone coming." Lily nodded, positioning herself behind a fallen log with a clear view of the approach road. The girl's instinctive grasp of tactical positioning, another echo of Victoria, didn't escape Morgan's notice. The shed's door was secured with a simple padlock, no match for Morgan's practiced touch. Inside, she found exactly what she'd hoped for. A maintenance worker's paradise of tools, equipment, and most importantly, an aging Ford pickup truck with Forest Service markings. Morgan conducted a quick inventory, keys hanging on a hook by the door, half a tank of gas according to the gauge, basic toolkit in the bed. The truck showed signs of hard use on mountain roads but appeared mechanically sound. More importantly, unlike the ATV, it wouldn't immediately identify them as fleeing suspects if they encountered anyone on the road. She returned to Lily, allowing herself a small smile of triumph. "We've got wheels. Older truck, but it'll get us to Miller's Crossing faster than the ATV, and without the tracker." Relief flickered across Lily's face, quickly replaced by wariness. "Won't they report it stolen too?" "Eventually. But maintenance vehicles don't get checked as frequently, especially in remote locations. By the time they realize it's missing, we'll hopefully be talking to Sheriff Oakes." Together, they pushed the tracked ATV deep into the underbrush, covering it with branches and forest debris. It wouldn't withstand close inspection, but might delay discovery long enough to matter. Morgan transferred their meager supplies to the truck, then helped Lily into the passenger seat. The Ford started with a reluctant growl, the engine clearly in need of tuning but functional. Morgan navigated carefully down the rough access road, constantly scanning for potential threats. According to the ranger's map, they were about 20 miles from Miller's Crossing, traversing roads unlikely to be included in the initial search perimeter. "How's your head?" Morgan asked, noticing Lily's pallor as the truck bounced over the uneven terrain. "Hurts," Lily admitted, one hand pressed against her temple. "But I'm okay." Morgan nodded, reaching into the first aid kit she'd brought from the ranger station. "Take these," she said, passing over 2 ibuprofen tablets and a water bottle. "Not ideal for a concussion, but better than nothing for the pain." Lily accepted the pills gratefully, swallowing them with a small sip of water. "Morgan, what happens if we make it to Miller's Crossing? What if this Sheriff Oakes doesn't believe us either?" The question cut to the heart of their uncertain situation. Morgan considered her response carefully, unwilling to offer false hope, but equally reluctant to feed the girl's fears. "Then we keep moving," she said finally. "Call my contact in Grand Junction. There are people who can help, Lily. People outside. Your stepfather's reach. But what about school, my friends? My whole life is in Cedar Ridge." The plaintive note in Lily's voice struck Morgan with unexpected force. Despite everything the teenager had endured, despite the abuse and isolation, she still grieved for the normal life being ripped away. It was a poignant reminder of how young she truly was, despite her remarkable resilience. "One step at a time," Morgan advised gently. "First safety, then justice, then rebuilding. That's how it works when your world gets turned upside down." Lily fell silent, staring out the window at the passing forest. After several minutes, she spoke again, her voice barely audible above the truck's engine. "Ray has my mom's medals, keeps them locked in his gun safe, said they were too valuable to leave out, but really he just didn't want me to have them." Morgan's hands tightened on the steering wheel, fresh anger surging through her. The appropriation of Victoria's medals, tangible symbols of her service and sacrifice, seemed a particularly cruel form of emotional abuse. "We'll get them back," she promised, the words emerging before she could consider their implications. "All of it, the medals, your benefits, your life." Lily turned to study Morgan's profile, a cautious hope warming her expression. "You really believe that, don't you?" "I do," Morgan confirmed, surprising herself with the depth of her conviction. "Your mother wouldn't quit, and neither will we." They continued along the forest road, gradually descending toward less rugged terrain. The truck performed better than Morgan had expected, handling the rough conditions with the stolid reliability of equipment designed for function rather than comfort. As they approached a junction where the service road connected with a paved county route, Morgan slowed, assessing their options. According to the map, turning right would lead them directly to Miller's Crossing. Left would take them on a longer route, eventually connecting with the highway to Grand Junction, bypassing the small town entirely. The decision crystallized as Morgan spotted a vehicle in the distance, coming from the direction of Miller's Crossing, a sheriff's department SUV moving at patrol speed. Their 30-minute head start had expired. "Down," she ordered Lily, who immediately slid lower in her seat. Morgan pulled the truck onto a narrow side trail, cutting the engine and dousing the lights. "Stay quiet." The sheriff's vehicle approached slowly, its roof-mounted spotlight sweeping across the forest edge. Morgan held her breath as the beam briefly illuminated their position, then moved on. The SUV continued past their hiding spot without slowing, disappearing around a bend in the road. "That wasn't Ray," Lily whispered, cautiously raising her head. "Different county markings." "Miller's Crossing Sheriff's Department," Morgan confirmed, having noted the distinctive insignia on the vehicle's door. "Looks like they've been alerted to watch for us." The development forced a recalibration of their plans. If Miller's Crossing law enforcement was already participating in the search, their hope of finding refuge with Sheriff Oakes had dwindled significantly. "We need a new destination," Morgan decided, restarting the truck and pulling back onto the service road, this time turning left, away from Miller's Crossing. "And we need to ditch this vehicle soon. It's too recognizable." They traveled in tense silence for several miles, Morgan constantly checking the rearview mirror for signs of pursuit. The morning had fully bloomed now, sunlight filtering through, the pine canopy casting dappled shadows across the road. "There's something I don't understand," Lily said suddenly. "If Ray's been stealing my benefits all these years, why didn't anyone from the military ever check on me? Don't they care what happens to people like me?" The question carried layers of hurt that transcended the immediate situation. The abandoned child of a fallen service member, wondering if her mother's sacrifice had been forgotten by the institution that had claimed her life. "It's complicated," Morgan replied, choosing her words carefully. "The system is designed to provide financial support, but oversight is minimal once benefits are assigned. It relies on guardians doing the right thing, and when they don't," she trailed off, unwilling to complete the depressing assessment. "So he just got away with it. For years." "So far," Morgan corrected firmly. "Not anymore." They emerged from the forest onto a more established county road, the terrain opening into rolling meadows, interspersed with stands of aspen turning golden with the season. The change in landscape brought increased vulnerability, more visibility, more potential encounters with other vehicles. Morgan spotted a roadside diner ahead, its gravel parking lot occupied by several cars and 2 semi-trucks. A hand-painted sign proclaimed "Big Sky Diner, best pie in 3 counties." "We need to make a call," she decided, pulling into the lot and parking at the far end, away from the other vehicles. "And we both need food. Real food, not energy bars." Lily eyed the diner nervously. "Is it safe? Won't someone recognize us?" "Lower risk than staying mobile in a stolen Forest Service truck," Morgan assessed. "We'll keep it brief, 20 minutes max, just long enough to contact my friend in Grand Junction and get some calories in you." The diner's interior was exactly what Morgan expected. Worn vinyl booths, counter seating, air fragrant with coffee and grilling meat. A middle-aged waitress greeted them with practiced cheerfulness, leading them to a booth in the back corner. At Morgan's request, "Coffee for me, hot chocolate for my niece," Morgan ordered, noting how Lily hunched slightly, keeping her bruised temple turned away from the waitress's view. "And whatever breakfast special you're running." "You got it, hun. Kitchen's running a farmhand platter today. Eggs, bacon, pancakes, hash browns, big enough to share if you want." "Perfect. We'll split one." Morgan waited until the waitress departed, before leaning in. "You okay?" Lily nodded, though her hands trembled slightly as she arranged the silverware. "Just nervous. Feels weird being out in the open." "I know. But sometimes hiding in plain sight is safer than skulking around looking suspicious." Morgan glanced toward the counter, spotting a payphone near the restrooms. "I'm going to make that call. Stay here, keep your head down, but try to look normal. If anyone asks, you're my niece from Denver, and we're heading to Grand Junction to visit family." The phone booth offered minimal privacy, but Morgan positioned herself to maintain a clear view of Lily while she dialed. The number connected after 4 rings. "Veterans Outreach Center. This is Marcus." Relief flooded through Morgan at the familiar voice. "Marcus, it's Morgan Reese. I need help." A pause, then, "Morgan, Christ, where are you? There's an APB out with your name on it. Kidnapping charges. What the hell's going on?" Morgan gave the condensed version, finding Lily, the military connection, Ray's abuse and financial fraud, their current situation. Marcus listened without interruption, years of handling veterans in crisis evident in his measured silence. "So you need extraction," he summarized when she finished. "For both of you." "Yes, and legal help. This girl has been systematically abused and robbed by someone with a badge and connections. Going through normal channels will just return her to her abuser. Where are you now exactly? Morgan described their location, keeping details deliberately vague in case the line wasn't secure. I know the place, Marcus confirmed. Stay put. I can have someone there in 90 minutes. Order pie, drink coffee, look like normal travelers. My contact will approach you with the phrase, "Victoria sends regards." Got it? Got it. Thanks, Marcus. Morgan, be careful. This deputy has escalated the situation significantly. APB describes you as armed and dangerous, potential PTSD episode. They're setting up a narrative. The warning sent ice through Morgan's veins. Ray wasn't just trying to recover Lily. He was establishing a pretext that would justify extreme measures. If confronted by law enforcement, Morgan would be seen as a mentally unstable veteran, a threat requiring immediate neutralization rather than careful de-escalation. Understood, she said grimly. 90 minutes. When Morgan returned to the booth, their food had arrived, a massive platter of breakfast fare that would have fed a lumberjack. Lily had already started on her hot chocolate, the whipped cream, leaving a small mustache that reminded Morgan forcefully of how young she truly was. We need to stay here, Morgan explained quietly, sliding into the booth. Help is coming, but it'll be about 90 minutes. Think you can handle that? Lily nodded, some color returning to her cheeks as she took her first bite of pancake. What did your friend say? That Ray has escalated things. Morgan kept her voice low, conscious of other diners nearby. He's painted me as dangerous, possibly having some kind of PTSD episode. It's a smart play. Makes any law enforcement who spots us more likely to come in hard and fast. Fear flashed across Lily's face. They'll shoot first? Not if we're smart and careful, Morgan assured her, though privately she recognized the significantly heightened risk. Eat your breakfast. We need to look like normal travelers, not fugitives. They ate methodically, both recognizing the necessity of fueling bodies that had been running on adrenaline and minimal calories. The waitress refilled Morgan's coffee twice, each time casting a curious glance at Lily's bruised temple, but asking no questions. Is there anything you want me to know? Morgan asked after they'd made significant progress through the massive breakfast. Anything that might help when we talk to the authorities who can actually help? Lily pushed a piece of bacon around her plate, considering the question. Ray keeps everything in his safe. All the financial documents, Mom's medals, even letters. She sent me while she was deployed that I never got to see. She paused, her expression darkening. And videos. Morgan stilled, coffee mug halfway to her lips. Videos? He records the punishment sometimes. Says it's to show me how hysterical I get, how I make him do it. Lily's voice had dropped to a whisper, shame coloring her words despite the fact that she had nothing to be ashamed of. He keeps them on a hard drive in the safe too. The revelation added another layer of horror to an already nightmarish situation, but also a potential avenue for irrefutable evidence. Morgan carefully controlled her expression, not wanting Lily to see the rage boiling beneath her calm exterior. That's important information, she said evenly. It means there's concrete evidence that can't be explained away. Lily nodded, though she wouldn't meet Morgan's eyes. I've never told anyone that before. I was too embarrassed. Look at me, Morgan said, waiting until Lily reluctantly raised her gaze. What he did was wrong. All of it. None of it was your fault, and you have nothing to be embarrassed about. The shame is his to carry, not yours. Tears welled in Lily's eyes, quickly blinked away with the practiced control of someone who had learned that showing emotion often made things worse. Their conversation was interrupted by the diner's door swinging open, admitting a man in a sheriff's department uniform. Morgan tensed, casually shifting her body to shield Lily from direct view while assessing potential exits. The deputy approached the counter, exchanging familiar greetings with the waitress. Daniela's car was parked behind the diner, a nondescript gray SUV with tinted windows and Colorado plates. Nothing about it screamed government or law enforcement, which was precisely the point. As they approached the vehicle, Morgan maintained situational awareness, scanning the parking lot and surrounding area for any sign of surveillance or threat. "I'll drive," Daniela said, unlocking the doors with a remote. "Morgan, you're in back. With Lily, less visible that way." Morgan nodded, helping Lily into the rear seat before sliding in beside her. The interior was clean but utilitarian, with a police scanner mounted discreetly beneath the dashboard and what appeared to be a small gun safe secured between the front seats. Daniela was clearly someone who came prepared. "We're heading to a safe house about 2 hours from here," Daniela explained as she pulled onto the highway heading west. Former military property, now owned by a veterans support network. Off the books, secure perimeter, multiple exit routes. "Who else knows we're coming?" Morgan asked, her tone neutral but questioning. Daniela glanced in the rearview mirror, recognizing the underlying concern. "Just Marcus and the house manager. Retired force recon, completely trustworthy. Nobody with ties to local law enforcement." The answer seemed to satisfy Morgan, who relaxed marginally against the seat. Beside her, Lily stared out the window, watching the landscape roll by with the wary vigilance of someone who had learned never to fully lower her guard. "How's your head feeling?" Morgan asked her softly. "Better," Lily replied, though the pallor of her skin suggested otherwise. The food helped. Daniela adjusted the climate control. "There's a first aid kit under the seat if you need it, and water bottles in the side compartments." They traveled in relative silence for the next 30 minutes, the SUV maintaining a precise 5 miles over the speed limit, fast enough to make good time, but not enough to attract attention. The police scanner emitted occasional bursts of static and clipped phrases, Daniela monitoring it with practiced ease. "So," Daniela said finally, breaking the contemplative quiet, "Marcus gave me the outline, but I'd like to hear directly from you two what happened. Details matter when we're building a case." Morgan glanced at Lily, silently asking permission to share her story. The girl nodded, but kept her gaze fixed on the passing landscape, a defensive detachment settling over her features. Starting with her arrival at the gas station in Cedar Ridge, Morgan recounted the events of the past 18 hours, finding Lily, discovering Victoria's military ID, the encounter with Ray, their flight through the forest, the ranger's assistance, and everything that had followed. She kept her account factual and precise, Marine training evident in her organized narrative. Daniela listened without interruption, occasionally checking her mirrors with the habitual vigilance of someone accustomed to being followed. When Morgan finished, she nodded thoughtfully. "Lily," she said gently, "would you feel comfortable telling me a bit about your life with Ray? Whatever you're willing to share helps us build a stronger case." Lily remained silent for so long that Morgan thought she might refuse. Then in a quiet but steady voice, she began to speak. "It started after Mom died. He was nice at first, one of her high school friends who came to the funeral. Said he'd always cared about her, wanted to look after me like she would have wanted." A bitter smile ghosted across her lips, Classic, right? Looking back, it's so obvious. Morgan resisted the urge to reach for the girl's hand, sensing she needed space to tell her story without interruption. We moved away from my old neighborhood 6 months after they got married. New town where nobody knew us. That's when things changed. Started with little stuff, checking my phone, reading my diary, not letting me hang out with friends. Said he was protecting me. Lily's fingers picked at a loose thread on her jacket sleeve, a nervous habit that seemed to help her maintain composure as she continued. By the time I was 12, he had complete control. I wasn't allowed to do anything without permission. Had to account for every minute at school. If I broke a rule, even one I didn't know existed, there were consequences. The physical abuse. Daniela prompted gently when Lily paused. When did that start? 13, I think, after I asked about visiting my grandmother in Phoenix. He said she didn't want to see me, that she blamed me for Mom's death because Mom wouldn't have re-enlisted if she hadn't needed the money for my college fund. Morgan's jaw tightened, another piece of the psychological manipulation becoming clear. Ray had systematically isolated Lily from potential support systems while simultaneously cultivating guilt over her mother's sacrifice. That was the first time he hit me, Lily continued, her voice taking on a detached quality that Morgan recognized as a protective mechanism. Said I was being ungrateful, disrespecting Mom's memory. After that, it just became normal. And no one at school noticed? Daniela asked, her tone carefully neutral. Ray's smart, makes sure the bruises don't show, and he's Deputy Harrington to everyone in town. Coaches Little League, helps with the food drive at Thanksgiving. Nobody would believe me over him. Lily's voice cracked slightly. I tried once, told a school counselor. She called Ray immediately, said she was concerned about my fantasy life and attention-seeking behavior. He was so angry that night. She trailed off, the memory clearly too painful to articulate. You mentioned financial documents, Daniela said, after giving Lily a moment to collect herself. What made you suspect he was stealing your benefits? I found papers in his desk last month. Was looking for my birth certificate because I need it for a school trip to Canada in the spring. Instead, I found statements from the VA and something called a survivor benefit plan. Large deposits every month since Mom died, but I've never seen any of it. We live on his deputy salary, supposedly. Lily's voice grew stronger as she shifted from emotional trauma to concrete facts. He's been telling me for years that we can't afford things. Decent clothes, a laptop for school, my asthma medication. Says we have to budget carefully on his salary. But these statements showed over $200,000 had been paid out since Mom died. And when you confronted him, Daniela prompted, he lost it, worse than ever before. Said I had no right to go through his private things, that I couldn't understand adult financial matters. Lily touched her bruised temple gingerly. I don't remember much after the first hit. When I woke up, I was locked in my room. I climbed out the window that night, took his car while he was sleeping and just drove. Didn't have a plan beyond. Getting away. Morgan's respect for the girl's courage deepened. With no support system, no outside validation of the abuse she was suffering, Lily had still found the strength to escape. A testament to both her resilience and Victoria's legacy. You did the right thing, Morgan told her firmly. Getting away was exactly what you needed to do. Daniela nodded agreement. And the videos you mentioned to Morgan, the recordings of the abuse, those would be powerful evidence if we can access them. They're in the safe. Lily confirmed. In his home office, he watches them sometimes. Makes me watch too. Says it's to show me how I provoke him, how it's my fault. The casual cruelty of this particular form of psychological torture made Morgan's blood boil, but she maintained a calm exterior for Lily's sake. The safe also contains financial records, your mother's medals, Daniela asked, making a mental note. Everything important. He's paranoid about security, changes the combination regularly. Do you know the current combination? Lily shook her head, then hesitated. But I know where he keeps it written down, inside his copy of the county law enforcement manual. He thinks I don't know. Morgan and Daniela exchanged a significant look through the rearview mirror. Access to the safe would provide the concrete evidence needed to substantiate Lily's account. Financial records documenting the theft of benefits, physical proof of abuse in the videos, and perhaps other damning material they hadn't yet discovered. That's extremely helpful information, Daniela said. Once we get to the safe house, we'll work with legal counsel to determine the best approach for securing that evidence. The SUV crested a rise in the highway, revealing a spectacular vista of mountain ranges stretching to the horizon. Under other circumstances, it might have been a moment to appreciate the natural beauty. Instead, all three occupants remained hyper-aware of their surroundings, watching for any sign of pursuit. Heads up, Daniela said suddenly, her tone shifting to alert. State Patrol setting up what looks like a checkpoint ahead. Morgan leaned forward, spotting the flashing lights approximately half a mile distant. 2 patrol cars were positioned on the shoulder, officers directing traffic into a single lane. Random check or looking for us? She asked tensely. Let's not find out, Daniela replied, smoothly slowing the SUV and taking the next exit without signaling. Alternative route. Adds 40 minutes, but keeps us off the main highway. The exit led to a secondary road that wound through farmland before reconnecting with more rugged terrain. Daniela drove with the confident precision of someone intimately familiar with evasive tactics, maintaining a speed that wouldn't attract attention while putting distance between them and the checkpoint. They're expanding the search perimeter, she explained. Ray's connections must be substantial to mobilize resources this quickly across county lines. Or he's convinced them I'm genuinely dangerous, Morgan observed grimly. PTSD veteran kidnaps. Teenager makes for a compelling law enforcement priority. Will they be waiting at your safe house? Lily asked, fear edging back into her voice. Very unlikely, Daniela assured her. The property isn't connected to any of the names they'd be. Checking. It's owned by a shell corporation 3 layers removed from any veteran support organization. The explanation seemed to settle Lily's immediate concern, but Morgan could see the emotional and physical toll of their journey etched in the girl's posture. The slumped shoulders, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she startled at sudden movements or sounds. Despite her remarkable resilience, Lily was nearing her limits. Try to rest, Morgan suggested gently. I'll keep watch. You're safe for now. To her surprise, Lily leaned slightly against her shoulder, a small gesture of trust that spoke volumes. Within minutes, exhaustion claimed the teenager, her breathing evening out as she slipped into a light sleep. She's remarkable, Daniela commented quietly, watching in the rearview mirror. Most adults wouldn't have handled this situation with half her composure. Victoria's daughter, Morgan replied simply, as if that explained everything. In many ways, it did. They drove in companionable silence for the next hour, winding through increasingly remote countryside. The police scanner remained quiet, a good sign that they had successfully evaded the immediate search perimeter. As they turned onto a gravel road that climbed steadily into more mountainous terrain, Daniela broke the silence. "Marcus told me a bit about your background. 11 years long-haul trucking after the Marines, living mostly on the road, no fixed address for the past 5 years. Morgan raised an eyebrow, neither confirming nor denying. "I'm not judging," Daniela clarified, "just thinking about next steps. When this situation stabilizes, you'll need to consider your options carefully. Ray has resources and connections. He won't just let this go, especially once evidence of his crimes comes to light." The implication was clear. Morgan's life had been irrevocably altered the moment she'd found Lily behind that gas station. There was no return to the comfortable anonymity of the open road, at least not in the immediate future. "One step at a time," Morgan replied, unconsciously echoing the advice she'd given Lily earlier. "First, get her somewhere safe. Then build. A case that can't be dismissed or buried. After that," she shrugged, "I'll figure it out." "You should know," Daniela said carefully. "Marcus has already reached out to some contacts at the Veterans Benefits Administration. Assuming we can document the financial fraud, there are procedures for recovering misappropriated funds and reassigning benefits to a legitimate guardian." Morgan nodded, having expected as much. The military took care of its own, sometimes belatedly, sometimes imperfectly, but with bureaucratic relentlessness once the machinery was properly engaged. "And custody?" she asked, the question that had been hovering unspoken between them. "That's more complicated. Child Protective Services will be involved, but with a grandmother in Phoenix who's been deliberately cut off from contact, there's a strong case for family placement once Ray's unfit status is established." The response satisfied Morgan. Reuniting Lily with her maternal grandmother would provide both family connection and legal distance from Ray's sphere of influence. It was the best possible outcome, assuming they could successfully navigate the legal challenges ahead. The gravel road eventually gave way to a narrower track that wound between pine trees, eventually opening onto a clearing where a large cabin-style structure stood, its architecture blending naturally with the surrounding forest. A weathered sign reading Eagle Ridge Retreat hung beside the entrance to the property. "Home sweet home," Daniela announced, pulling up to a security gate and entering a code on a keypad. "At least for the next few days." The gate swung open, allowing them to proceed up a curved driveway to the main building. As they approached, a man emerged from the entrance, tall and broad-shouldered with the unmistakable bearing of a career Marine. Despite being well into his 60s, he moved with the fluid economy of someone who maintained rigorous physical discipline. "That's Colonel Matthews," Daniela explained as she parked. "Retired Force Recon, now runs this place as a retreat for veterans needing space to decompress. He's expecting us." The motion of the vehicle stopping roused Lily from her light sleep. She blinked in confusion, momentarily disoriented before her surroundings registered. "We're here," Morgan told her gently. "Safe house I mentioned." Lily straightened, instinctively smoothing her hair and adjusting her clothing. Small gestures of someone conditioned to present a composed exterior, regardless of inner turmoil. Morgan recognized the behavior from her own military training, where appearance and composure were emphasized even in crisis. Colonel Matthews approached as they exited the vehicle, his assessment of them swift and comprehensive without being intrusive. "Welcome to Eagle Ridge," he greeted them, his voice a pleasant bass rumble. "Marcus briefed me on the situation. We've got secure accommodations ready, satellite communications if needed, and a perimeter alarm system that would make Fort Knox jealous." His gaze settled on Lily, warming with grandfatherly concern. "You must be Staff Sergeant Harrington's, our daughter. I didn't know Victoria personally, but her reputation in the Corps was exceptional. She'd be proud of your courage." Lily blinked rapidly, clearly moved by this connection to her mother's legacy from yet another unexpected source. "Thank you, sir," she managed, the formal address coming naturally. "Let's get you all inside," Matthews continued, gesturing toward the main building. "Dr. Stevens will be here within the hour to check that head injury properly. Food's ready whenever you want it, and we can discuss next steps once you've had a chance to settle in." As they followed him toward the entrance, Morgan felt a weight lift from her shoulders, not completely, but significantly. For the first time since finding Lily, they had reached a genuinely secure location with competent allies who understood the stakes. The decisive action she had taken back at the gas station, guided by instinct and obligation, had led them to this moment of relative safety. The path ahead remained challenging, with legal battles and potential confrontations still to come. But looking at Lily walking beside her, steps steadier and posture slightly more relaxed, Morgan knew with absolute certainty that she would see this through to the end, whatever that might entail. Victoria had saved her life once. Saving Victoria's daughter wasn't just repaying a debt. It was the right thing to do, the only thing that would allow Morgan to look at herself in the mirror and recognize the Marine she had once been, the woman she still was beneath the layers of isolation and wandering. As they stepped through the doorway into the warmth of the safe house, Morgan made a silent promise to Victoria's memory. "Your daughter will be safe. Your sacrifice will be honored. Your legacy will be protected." It was a vow she intended to keep no matter the cost. Eagle Ridge Retreat proved to be exactly what they needed. A fortified sanctuary disguised as a rustic mountain lodge. The main building housed comfortable living quarters, a well-equipped kitchen, communication center, and a medical examination room that looked more professional than many small-town clinics. Colonel Matthews gave them a brief tour before showing them to adjacent rooms where they could rest and clean up. Dr. Stevens should arrive within the hour, he informed them. "In the meantime, there are fresh clothes in the dressers. Might not be perfect fits, but they're clean. Bathrooms stocked with everything you might need." "Thank you," Morgan said, the words inadequate for the depth of her gratitude. "For all of this." Matthews waved away her thanks with the easy dismissal of someone accustomed to service without recognition. "Marines take care of our own, Reese. Staff Sergeant Harrington's daughter is family to all of us." His gaze shifted to Lily, who stood half a step behind Morgan, exhaustion evident despite her efforts to maintain composure. "Get some rest, young lady. You're safe here." Left alone in her assigned room, Morgan took her first deep breath in what felt like days. The space was simple but comfortable, queen-sized bed with crisp sheets, solid wooden furniture, a window offering a view of forest and mountains beyond. For someone who had lived primarily in the cab of a truck for 11 years, it felt almost extravagantly spacious. She showered quickly, military efficiency overriding the temptation to linger under the hot water. The clean clothes provided, jeans, t-shirt, flannel overshirt, fit well enough, clearly part of a stockpile kept for guests of various sizes. Morgan caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror as she dressed, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the new lines etched by stress and fatigue. She looked older than her 46 years in that moment, weighted by responsibility and decision. A soft knock at her door pulled her from self-assessment. She opened it to find Daniela standing in the hallway, expression serious. "Doctor's here early. She's examining Lily now. When they're finished, Marcus wants to conference call. We need to make some decisions." Morgan nodded, following Daniela to what appeared to be a small conference room adjacent to the communications center. Colonel Matthews was already there, studying a topographic map spread across the table, making notations with a mechanical pencil. He looked up as they entered. "Reese, just going over the property boundaries and security protocols. 6 access points all monitored. Motion sensors in the outer perimeter. Cameras on the main approach road. If anyone comes looking, we'll have plenty of warning." "You think they'll find us here?" Morgan asked, taking a seat at the table. Matthews exchanged a glance with Daniela. "Let's just say we're prepared for all contingencies. Deputy Harrington has escalated his response significantly. State police, county resources, even some federal assets through his connections." "What kind of connections?" Morgan pressed, sensing something left unsaid. Daniela took over. "Marcus did some digging while we were en route. Ray Harrington isn't just a small-town deputy. Before moving to Cedar Ridge, he worked for the U.S. Marshal Service Witness Security Division for 11 years. Has contacts throughout federal law enforcement. The information landed like a physical blow. It explained so much. Ray's ability to isolate and control Lily, his skill at presenting a respectable facade to the community, the effectiveness of his gaslighting techniques. He'd been professionally trained in creating new identities and manipulating perceptions. "Does Lily know this?" Morgan asked. "Not yet," Daniela replied. "Dr. Stevens thought it best to complete her examination first. The good news is the head. Injury isn't serious. Mild concussion, no signs of internal bleeding or skull fracture. She's dehydrated and exhausted, but otherwise physically stable." Before Morgan could respond, the door opened to admit a petite woman in her 50s, wearing a practical button-down shirt and slacks, stethoscope still hanging around her neck. Her short, silver hair framed a face that managed to appear both kind and no-nonsense simultaneously. "Morgan Reese? I'm Dr. Elena Stevens." She extended her hand. "Lily speaks very highly of you." "How is she?" Morgan asked, returning the handshake. "Physically, she'll be fine. The concussion symptoms should resolve with rest. Bruising on her temple and cheekbone consistent with blunt force trauma, a fist most likely. Older contusions on her torso and upper arms in various stages of healing." Dr. Stevens's professional demeanor couldn't entirely mask her anger at these findings. "What concerns me more is the psychological impact. Classic signs of long-term abuse, hypervigilance, flinching at sudden movements, excessive apologizing for minor things." "But she's strong," Morgan interjected, feeling a strange need to advocate for Lily's resilience. Dr. Stevens nodded. "Remarkably so. That's likely what saved her, both the physical escape and psychological survival. She's got her mother's spirit, from what I gather." The observation, coming from someone who had just met Lily, struck Morgan forcefully. Victoria's legacy lived on in her daughter, not just in physical resemblance, but in core qualities that couldn't be erased by years of abuse. "She's resting now," Dr. Stevens continued. "I gave her a mild sedative. Nothing that would prevent her from functioning if necessary, but enough to help her get some genuine sleep. She wanted me to tell you she'll be ready when you need her. Morgan's throat tightened at the message. Even now, Lily was thinking of how she could contribute, how she could be useful rather than a burden. Another echo of Victoria, who had always put the mission and her team before personal comfort. Marcus is standing by for the conference call. Daniela reminded them, gesturing toward the video screen mounted on the wall. Colonel Matthews activated the system with practiced ease. After a few moments, the screen displayed a man in his early 50s with close-cropped gray hair and the solid build of someone who still maintained military fitness standards despite civilian attire. "Morgan," he greeted with a nod. "Glad you made it to Eagle Ridge. How's our young Marine's daughter doing?" "Resting," Morgan replied. "Dr. Stevens says she'll be okay physically." "Good. We've got developments on multiple fronts you need to know about." Marcus's expression grew more serious. "Ray Harrington has escalated this beyond what any of us anticipated. He's leveraged his Marshal Service connections to classify this as a high-priority abduction with potential domestic terrorism implications." "Terrorism?" Morgan repeated incredulously. "On what grounds?" "He's painting you as a radicalized veteran with anti-government views, claiming you targeted his stepdaughter specifically because of his law enforcement position. The narrative he's pushing is that you're part of a fringe militia group planning to use Lily as leverage. The absolute inversion of reality would have been almost laughable if the implications weren't so dire. That's insane. There's no evidence to support any of that." "Evidence isn't his primary concern right now," Marcus replied grimly. "Creating a narrative that justifies a maximum force response is. He's effectively turned this into a federal case, which gives him access to resources he wouldn't have through local channels alone." Morgan absorbed this, mind racing through implications. "So every law enforcement agency in the region is looking for us, believing I'm armed and dangerous, potentially holding Lily as a hostage or worse." "Correct. Which means our window for legal action is narrowing rapidly. Once this reaches a certain momentum, the facts become secondary to the established narrative." Dr. Stevens, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "I've documented Lily's injuries comprehensively. Photographs, detailed examination notes, preliminary psychological assessment. All indicate a pattern consistent with ongoing abuse, not a recent abduction scenario." "That's a start," Marcus acknowledged. "But without the financial records and video evidence Lily mentioned, it's still potential her word against his territory. Ray has spent years establishing his credibility in the community while systematically undermining hers. So we need what's in that safe," Morgan concluded. A tense silence fell over the room, the unspoken question hovering. How to access a safe in the home of a deputy who had mobilized a multi-agency manhunt? "There's something else you should know," Marcus said finally. "I managed to contact Lily's grandmother in Phoenix, Eleanor Harrington. She confirms Ray deliberately cut off communication years ago, told her Lily blamed her for Victoria's death and wanted no contact. She's been sending letters and gifts that Lily never received." Morgan's jaw tightened. Another layer of Ray's manipulation revealed. "She's willing to help?" "More than willing. Desperate to reconnect with her granddaughter. She's already engaged a family law attorney and is prepared to file for emergency custody once we have evidence of Ray's unfitness. She's flying to Grand Junction tomorrow." The news was the first genuinely positive development since their arrival at Eagle Ridge. With a legitimate family member advocating for Lily, the path to legal protection became significantly clearer. Assuming they could secure the evidence, needed to overcome Ray's law enforcement shield. "We need a plan to access that safe," Morgan stated, bringing the conversation back to the immediate obstacle. Colonel Matthews, who had been quietly listening while continuing to mark the property map, looked up. "Not we. You. You're already implicated, Reese. Anyone else who directly involves themselves in retrieving evidence from a law enforcement officer's home risks serious charges." "He's right," Daniela agreed reluctantly. "This has to be a single-person operation, minimal footprint, plausible deniability for everyone else involved." Morgan nodded, having already reached the same conclusion. "I'll need specifics on the house layout, security systems, safe location. Lily can provide that. And a legal strategy," Marcus added. "We need to ensure any evidence retrieved remains admissible, which means chain of custody considerations, documentation of how it was obtained." Dr. Stevens frowned. "Are we really discussing breaking and entering into a deputy sheriff's home? There must be legal alternatives." "We've explored them," Marcus assured her. "Given Ray's connections and the narrative he's established, conventional approaches, welfare checks, child protective services investigations would be intercepted or controlled. He'd have ample warning to dispose of incriminating evidence. The ethical calculation is straightforward," Colonel Matthews stated with the clarity of someone accustomed to difficult field decisions. "A child is being abused. Financial crimes are being committed against a fallen Marine's dependent. The systems designed to protect have been compromised by the abuser's position. Limited, targeted action to secure evidence that enables proper legal remedies is justified." His assessment, delivered with the unadorned precision of a military briefing, seemed to settle the debate. Even Dr. Stevens nodded reluctantly, medical ethics yielding to the practical necessities of the situation. "I'll need to talk with Lily," Morgan said. "Get all the details she can remember about the house, Ray's routines, the safe location." "She's sleeping now," Dr. Stevens reminded her. "The sedative should wear off in about 3 hours. She needs that rest." Morgan checked her watch. "Nearly 4 p.m. That works. I'll need tonight to plan anyway. Optimal approach would be pre-dawn, when Ray is most likely to be in deep sleep." "I can provide specialized equipment," Daniela offered. "Non-traceable vehicle, communication devices, entry tools. And I'll have our legal team standing by," Marcus added. "The moment you secure the evidence, we initiate emergency custody proceedings through Eleanor Harrington's attorney, file for a protective order, and present documentation of financial fraud to the Veterans Benefits Administration." The conference room had transformed into an operations center. The planned retrieval of evidence taking on the characteristics of a tactical mission. Morgan felt a familiar calm settling over her, the focused readiness she had known during her Marine days, when objectives were clear and action necessary despite the risks. "There's one more complication," Marcus said, his expression grave. "Ray has involved Julia Chen." The name meant nothing to Morgan, but she noted how both Colonel Matthews and Daniela tensed at its mention. "Who is Julia Chen?" she asked. "Former FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit, now private consultant specializing in fugitive tracking and threat assessment," Daniela explained. "She's legendary for finding people who don't want to be found, particularly in rural and wilderness environments. She's also ruthlessly effective," Matthews added. If Ray has brought her in, our operational timeline just compressed significantly. Morgan absorbed this new threat assessment, mentally adjusting parameters. How did you learn she's involved? I still have contacts in federal law enforcement, Marcus replied. Word is, Ray presented this as a potential militia-connected abduction, high profile enough to interest Chen. She arrived in Cedar Ridge 3 hours ago. The crisis point that Morgan had sensed approaching since finding Lily had now fully materialized. With federal resources mobilized, a professional tracker engaged, and a narrative established that justified extreme measures, their window for effective action was closing rapidly. Then we moved to night, Morgan decided. The tactical assessment, overriding the original plan. Not pre-dawn. Ray will be at the command center they've established, coordinating the search. The house will be empty. That's a significant tactical shift, Matthews observed, neither approving nor opposing, simply acknowledging the change. Higher risk of security systems, less certainty about the premises being vacant. Lower risk of direct confrontation, Morgan countered. And Chen will be focusing on potential flight routes, wilderness hiding spots, not a direct approach to Ray's house. It's the last thing they'd expect. A tense silence fell as the others considered her assessment. Finally, Marcus nodded. Your call, Morgan. You're on the ground. What support do you need? Everything Daniela mentioned, plus a digital camera for documenting what I find. A way to copy electronic files, and someone with advanced safe cracking. Skills or tools that can substitute. I can handle the safe, Daniela said. Former EOD technician, remember? Safes are just puzzles with slightly higher stakes. Morgan felt the pieces falling into place. Not a perfect plan, fraught with risks, both legal and physical. But the only viable path forward, given the rapidly deteriorating situation. She thought of Lily, sleeping under sedation just down the hall, trusting that Morgan would find a way to protect her from the man who had spent years systematically abusing her while stealing her rightful inheritance. Once we have the evidence, what's our exfiltration plan for Lily? Morgan asked. The tactical term coming naturally after years of disuse. Eleanor Harrington lands in Grand Junction at 10 a.m. tomorrow, Marcus answered. With evidence in hand, we file emergency motions. First thing in the morning, given Ray's escalation and the documentation we'll provide, any judge with basic human decency should grant immediate temporary custody to the grandmother. The plan assumed a functional justice system, one where evidence mattered more than a badge. It was a substantial assumption, given what they'd seen of Ray's influence, but they had few alternatives. And if the legal approach fails? Morgan pressed, needing to consider all contingencies. A loaded silence followed her question. Finally, Colonel Matthews spoke. That's not an outcome we're planning for, Reese. But if it comes to it, this property has been a waypoint for people, needing to disappear before. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. The implication was clear. There were backup plans beyond the legal system, last resorts that existed in the shadowy periphery of official channels. Morgan had suspected as much from the moment they'd arrived at Eagle Ridge. The retreat wasn't just a veteran's sanctuary. It was a modern underground railroad for those the system had failed. I should check on Lily, Morgan said, suddenly needing to see the girl, to remind herself of the human stakes beyond the tactical planning. She'll sleep for another few hours, Dr. Stevens reminded her, but you can look in on her if you'd like. Morgan nodded, rising from the table. We'll reconvene in 2 hours to finalize the operational plan. Daniela, I'll need everything you can tell me about security systems typical in rural law enforcement households. Colonel, any insights on countering? Julia Chen's tracking methodologies would be helpful. Under the cover of darkness, Morgan infiltrated Ray's home, disabling security systems with Daniela's guidance through a concealed earpiece. The safe, hidden behind a hunting trophy in Ray's study, yielded everything they needed. Financial, records documenting years of stolen benefits, Victoria's medals, and most damning of all, video files showing Ray's systematic abuse. With evidence secured, Morgan transmitted digital copies to Marcus's legal team while making her escape. By dawn, Eleanor Harrington's attorney had filed emergency custody motions, backed by irrefutable documentation of abuse and fraud. Ray returned home to find his safe compromised and his carefully constructed life unraveling. When federal agents arrived with warrants related to benefits fraud against a military dependent, his law enforcement shield crumbled. His attempts to maintain the kidnapping narrative collapsed when Lily appeared in court with her grandmother, Dr. Stevens's medical documentation, and the recovered evidence exposing years of abuse. 3 months later, Lily stood on the porch of her grandmother's Phoenix home, watching a familiar blue Peterbilt pull into the driveway. Morgan had testified at Ray's trial, helping secure convictions on multiple counts of fraud and child abuse. Now free of legal obligations, she'd arrived to say goodbye before returning to the open road. "You could stay," Lily suggested, hope in her voice. "Grandma has plenty of room." Morgan smiled, seeing Victoria in her daughter's determined expression. "I'll visit often," she promised, "but the highway's still where I belong." As they embraced, Morgan knew some debts could never be fully repaid, but in saving Victoria's daughter, she'd found something unexpected. Not just redemption, but family. She climbed back into her truck, watching Lily wave in the rearview mirror. The road ahead stretched endless and promising, no longer an escape, but a path connecting lives that fate had intertwined. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to our channel for more powerful tales of courage, connection, and the unexpected. Bonds that change lives forever. Remember, sometimes our greatest detours lead us exactly where we're meant to be.